All right. Hi, everybody. A very warm welcome to our September Suicide Prevention Awareness Session, which we are so grateful to be able to offer to you this evening. My name is Kathleen Donovan, and I'm a coordinator here at Your Parent Resource Center within Arlington Public Schools. And we're very grateful to sponsor this session tonight with the Arlington County Department of Human Services. We have two representatives here from DHS, Lynn Ye and Michael Swisher. Since I'm sharing my screen, I can't see everybody else who's here, but we're also co-sponsoring this with the Arlington Public Schools Office of Student Services. So if there's anybody from Student Services who wants to say a quick hello, feel free to do that. Otherwise, we'll hopefully give you a chance to do that later. Grateful to be joined by my colleague, Emma Pearl Sanchez, who, unlike me, is able to speak in two languages. Emma, would you take a moment and just tell everyone in Spanish how we're going to make the session accessible with language translation?
Yes. Buenas noches y bienvenidos a la sesión de la concienciación sobre la prevención del suicidio esta noche. Y solamente para recordarles que tenemos los subtítulos al español y también pueden escuchar la presentación por Microsoft y todas las indicaciones se las dejo en el chat y para las personas con las que me comuniqué, ya tienen toda la información. Gracias. Thank you, Kathleen.
Okay, thanks, Emma. And then we'll keep putting that in the chat. All right. Well, I know that as parents, our evening time is often very limited with nighttime routines and getting homework done and cleaning up after dinner and such. So I won't go on too long. I think many of us are aware of the dreadful impact suicide can have in our community, and nothing as a parent is more important to us than keeping our children safe. So we never like to let September go by without acknowledging suicide prevention and awareness. And the most important thing we can do is know what to do and how to help our students. And we have two amazing experts tonight that I'm very proud to call my colleagues, Dr. Ricia Weiner and Greg Myers. Both work in high schools here in Arlington, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. And Greg and Ricia, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and expertise with us tonight.
Thank you, Kathleen, and very happy to be here. I love talking with parents, with staff, community members about all these things. My name is Greg Myers. I'm a school psychologist at Wakefield High School, and I've been a school psychologist for more than 15 years now. Among other things, I'm also a youth mental health first aid trainer alongside Ricia, my co-presenter tonight. This also is just an area of interest and passion for me. I love talking about mental health, suicide prevention. I love these topics, so I'm happy to be here tonight. And I'll pass it to Ricia to introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Ricia Weiner, school psychologist as well, and I'm at Washington Liberty High School. I've been doing this for just a little longer than Greg. We'll just call it 20 plus years, but I love it so much, and that's why I keep doing it. It still brings me joy to be in this profession, to be in this career. So I'm excited to deliver this message, talk about suicide prevention and awareness. And again, it's a topic near and dear to my heart as well. As Greg said, we're both youth mental health first aiders. And so, yeah, I'll leave it at that and we'll get started. Oh, I forgot to say, I'm also a parent. I actually have two teenagers right now. I don't even know how that happened or when it happened, but I have a 13 and a 15-year-old as well. So I feel like I'm also in the middle of it. I'm living my work right now.
So speaking of awareness, we are aware that this title slide spells awareness with one S. I think that's not typical. That's not the typical way to spell it, perhaps. But I think in one of our last minute quick edits, an S must have dropped off. But that's not, we are not worried about the details tonight. We are worried about the big picture. We want to share with you not only some ways of thinking about things, but some actual skills tonight, hopefully. I think I speak for Ricia when I say that we both are big believers that mental health is health. And we want to share that message out with everybody that, you know, we think about health, like it seems so obvious to us that if we wanted to be more heart healthy, we wouldn't just look for signs of an unhealthy heart or just look for signs of a heart attack. We would actually take actions to make ourselves heart healthier. We might exercise more, or we might eat differently. So we're hoping that some of the skills we can share tonight will help deliver that message in the mental health world also. So thank you all for being here. We can go ahead and get started. I think I'll click us forward. Oh, you got it. There you go, Ricia. I'll pass it off to you.
So we wanted to put this slide in here and highlight 988, or the National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. This is actually a number that is available, as it says, nationwide, and it's 24/7. So this is a very difficult topic. It can be very, very emotional, especially if this is something that has touched your life or your family in some way. And so if you need to take a break, you know, mute us for a little while, please do that and take care of yourself. And 988 is available to anyone. If you have a topic you want to discuss that has to do with suicide or crisis, this is a number that you can access. Now, the 988 will put you into a call center, and what they do is then connect you with resources that are local to you. If for some reason your area code does not match where you currently live, you just want to make sure to mention that when you call. But this is a resource that's available to you for 24/7, and can be a great way to not only if you're in crisis, but also learn more information if you're in need of resources or anything like that, or just want to discuss the topic further, or you have a question. All right, so we wanted to start by giving a little bit of background and a little bit of context. And what you see here is that some national statistics, Greg and I were just discussing the latest statistics. Obviously, we're still in 2023, so that data is not really out yet. In 2022, that data is still being analyzed. That was part of our conversation that we were talking about, because they're still looking at the numbers. But so I think the most reliable data we have right now is looking at 2021. And you can see there that youth and young adults ages 10 to 24 years old account for 15% of all suicides. And it represents the second leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. In 2022, this is a number we felt a little more comfortable with, 9% of high school students reported attempting suicide during the previous 12 months. And that for me was a very alarming stat. And it's the reason why we're here talking about this information now. And we're going to be giving you some things to look out for, some ways to help, and some ways to support the youth in your life. One thing we do know, that suicide attempts were reported more frequently among girls than boys. And so it's just, these are things for us to keep in mind as sort of the foundation as we move forward in thinking about this information.
So I wanted to share just a little bit of context here for you in some ways when we talk about the phenomenon or the you know, statistics around suicide. And I apologize for crowding a bunch of things on here, but I wanted to illustrate one point to you all, which is first and foremost that that mental illness, mental health disorders, especially things like conditions like depression, are commonly associated with suicide. But I've always found this to be such an interesting fact here, that often when we do these things called psychological autopsies, or I say we, I mean the sort of the research community does psychological autopsies, which are studies post-mortem after the death, someone has died by suicide, where they look back at a person's life. And while at the time of death by suicide, it's typically, well, the statistics would tell us that it's about 46% of those who died by suicide had a known mental health condition. However, when they do these studies and they collect all the information about what was going on with the person, it's really 91% of the time that somebody would have met criteria, meaning you look at all the available information and you can see that there was a mental health condition present, a diagnosable condition, something like depression, at the time that somebody died by suicide, but it just wasn't known completely, or it wasn't diagnosed, or it wasn't fully understood. And I share this because I think it's really important for us to frame it this way. It's really about awareness and helping each other understand our conditions and understand what we're going through, so that we can get treatment to people sooner. So it's really about raising awareness, improving mental health, and that's why we're here today. So thank you, Ricia. You can see an overview here today. We just want to cover a couple basic things. And again, sorry if there's a couple little formatting things that may have come up here just in the way the slides got translated, but you can get the gist. We want to cover a little bit about risk factors. But honestly, and we want to talk about risk factors. We're going to also discuss protective factors. These things are really important for us to understand. What are the reasons that go around level of risk? What are the conditions that go around level of risk for people when we talk about suicide? And we will talk about warning signs, just to make sure that that's covered and we know what to look for out there. But honestly, I think the things that we're most excited to talk about with you all are ways to help, ways to improve mental health. I always think about the analogy of, we work with kids. Ricia and I are both in education. It's so much more effective if we tell people what to do rather than tell people what not to do, or we say what actions to take rather than what things to be afraid of happening. So we really hope that we can spend a good amount of our time on those skills today. So first, I think we're going to tackle a little bit about risk factors, and briefly I'll just share this basic definition. Is that a risk factor is anything that is associated with greater risk or greater likelihood of any particular condition happening. So I like to call risk factors, what is your risk on paper? These are the things that on paper would say that if somebody has depression, for example, they are statistically more likely to experience some symptoms or some elements of suicidality, or some aspects of suicide. Yes, it's a risk factor, but very importantly, I want to share that risk does not equal causality or certainty. Just because you have a diagnosis of depression or you have a history of substance abuse doesn't mean that you will experience suicidal thinking or have a suicide attempt. That's not how it works. What I like to think is that the more of these things that somebody may experience in their life, we've just highlighted a few risk factors here, the more that somebody experiences in their life, the greater need they have for intervention, or the greater need they have to work on self-care and awareness and good mental health in order to reduce their risk. So again, while it's not these things don't cause a suicide episode, for example, they do increase risk. So you can see, we've talked a little bit about mental illness, family stressors. That can be anything from a major life event, like the illness or death of a family member, divorce or separation, but it can also include things that might seem more mundane or routine, like financial difficulties can create great stress for a person. Access to lethal means. I want to make sure everyone knows that there are great resources out there to train you if you want to learn more about how to reduce lethal means, or reduce access to lethal means. The key to that is that suicidality is episodic, meaning as when someone's experiencing suicidal thinking, it doesn't, the risk level doesn't last forever. It's an episode. And if we can do things to reduce people's access to lethal means during that episode, during that window of time, we can save a life. So there are some great resources for you out there. I think we can try to share some of those at the end. I know Michael Swisher is very involved in educating the community about securing and making safe lethal means and reducing access to them. And then situational crises, including traumas. Trauma is in the eye of the beholder. It's different for everyone, but there are certain traumas that can occur in someone's life that would increase their risk. Protective factors are the opposite. Protective factors are things that on paper mean that you are more associated with health and the reduction of the unhealthy behaviors. So same thing, it doesn't necessarily mean causality, but the more of these that exist or are in good shape for a person, the better. So we just want to go into a couple of these in more detail so that you can understand how to support children or what to look for. When we see that these things are present, we can know that there's more stability perhaps in a young person's life. And if we see that very few of these are present, we might actually have our roadmap for working on improving some things in their lives. So some that we want to highlight are feeling connectedness. We'll talk about that in a moment. Having coping skills, ways to manage stress and the downtimes. Access to mental health supports. Does the person have a way to access care? Do they know how to do it? Do they have misconceptions about mental health care that exists? We also talk about things like purpose, self-esteem. There may be practices, cultural, religious beliefs and practices that promote healthy living too. We're going to highlight a couple of these now for you today. So one of them is this idea of connectedness, feeling connected. And I like to phrase this as the question of, do I belong? If a young person cannot answer that question in the affirmative, if they don't feel like they belong in any way with any group or person or movement, they may feel isolated and lost, and that is a risk factor. So we all need connection and community, even the introverts among us. I consider myself one of them. I need connection and community. It doesn't have to come in the same form for everyone. And it's about the sense of connection. It's about the connection that is perceived by the person. It's not about the numbers. There's no way to say that any one person should have a certain number of friends. It's not like you get to a magic number of 3 friends and you're good. It's really personal. But we do know that those who are less connected have worse mental health. So everybody, regardless of what young people may say to us, and and the way they may act about it, everyone wants to feel that they matter and have value within their community, that they are connected and part of something. And community, by the way, can take a lot of different forms too. So it doesn't have to be connectedness doesn't necessarily have to be peer friends only. It can come through family. It can come through neighborhood connectedness. It can come through feeling like I belong as part of a group that I do completely outside of school and family. Those things matter. So what I like to say is, I recommend that we challenge it. When teens say things like, I hate these, by the way, are pretty much quotes from the students that I work with at my high school. I hear these kinds of things all the time. I hate people. I don't need friends. I don't want the drama. I'm okay. And I ask them questions about how they're feeling and how they're connected. And they may sometimes be using these phrases as ways to kind of justify the position that they're stuck in. They may be feeling actually quite stuck and disconnected. So I like to challenge it and remind teens that we're all human. We all come from the same DNA, and our DNA evolved over millennia in communities. We are social creatures and we need others. So I recommend, what we need to do is help teens, help young people. I have teens here, but it's really applies to anybody. Connect through others with mutual interest, through activities with mutual interest. Those are the more natural opportunities. That's what we're looking for. That's how you're gonna help them find it. It's not by forcing them into an activity you think would be good. It's looking for what is natural. Another big one along the lines of these protective factors is sleep. And this is kind of part of coping. It's really kind of part of basic self-care. The experts say teens need 8 to 10 hours of sleep. Sleep hygiene, these are things you can Google and you can look up, but it really is all about structure and routine. If you want to make improvements in sleep, you got to improve the habits, make things similar every time. It takes a lot of work to fix sleep when it gets sort of flipped around. But generally speaking, get outside, get some daylight. At night, you need dark. It's better to have a room that's dark, cool, quiet. We need to watch out for caffeine. Young people don't always know the effects that such things can have on them. And they may be drinking a Monster drink at 5 p.m. and thinking that's okay for them to get to bed by 10, but that might not be true for them. Activity helps too. And of course, there's a lot of benefits associated with better sleep. Another major area of coping that I spend a lot of time in my discussions with students on is the idea of avoidance. Avoidance is at the center of so many of our mental health struggles. So there's research out there about avoidant coping and the poor mental health with which it's associated. People who have the avoidant coping style and who predominantly rely on avoidant coping to deal with things and use these techniques such as, resigned acceptance is like, well, there's nothing I can do about it anyway, so it is what it is. Distraction when it becomes too prolonged is a problem. To use a little distraction here and there and have a time limited thing that says, I'm feeling stressed, I've been working all day, I just need a 15-minute break. There's nothing wrong with that necessarily. But if people always lean on distraction as their way to get through everything and they never come back to the problem itself, that can be a sign that they're too avoidant in their coping style. The opposite of an avoidant coping style is an approach coping style, but what I really like to call that is attacking the problem. That's how I phrase it with my students is, let's figure out some ways that you can take a small step to attack the problem. So it can be helpful to phrase these things to students in a way that helps them see, it may feel like it's an impossible mountain to climb, or this problem is too overwhelming and it makes you want to give up. Well, or they may even say, I just have no motivation. I'm lazy, I have no motivation. I like to help students see motivation comes and goes. You're not lazy just because you're unmotivated right now. It's human nature to feel that way. It all happens to us. So let's start by not, villainizing or making you feel guilty or bad about the way that you feel. It's actually quite normal to feel that way, and you won't always feel that way. Things change. So some days you just got to get through the day until you can get to tomorrow, and you may feel different and may feel more motivated naturally. But attacking the problem is also all about building people up and helping them see their own resilience. Remind them, you are tough. I've seen you get through things before. I know you can do this. It's possible to feel this way, to feel as anxious and worried as you feel, and also still push through, but maybe we could do this together. Or maybe there's some small step you can take. So that we don't encourage by accident the common trap of over coddling or giving too much credence to the power of the anxiety or the stress, instead focusing on the fact that they can do this and they can get through it. So starting small with 100% buy-in, asking young people, let's pick the part that you're most motivated to work on right now. Have conversations about avoidance, talk about it, make it part of your daily, discussions, is, helping young people identify when they're avoiding instead of attacking the problem.
So another thing we can do is helping youth build resilience. And we can do that a couple ways. There's actually probably many ways, but we're going to highlight a couple here for you tonight. And one of that is that to teach and model healthy habits for mental health, just as you would for physical health. And Greg kind of talked about that a little bit as we were going. But this really is about talking about mental health and feelings openly, seeking therapy if warranted in a situation. Um, the modeling aspect comes in where you as the adult can think aloud, uh, essentially. And so that could be that you're talking with your teen and you're saying, wow, it was a really tough day for me today. It was really hard. There were a lot of things going on, but when I came home, I decided to take a couple minutes for myself just to relax and de-stress. And that was really helpful. I mean, the issues that I have to face at work will still be there tomorrow, but by coming home and recentering myself, I really feel like I can go in and do that again. Or I went for a run and that was really helpful. So it's really sort of thinking your habits on how you strive to be your healthy habits, really. To sort of talk them out loud and give the teen in your life or the youth in your life ideas about how they can do that for themselves too. So you're modeling that good behavior for them. The other thing is to check in with your teen regularly. So this is going beyond like, did you get your homework done? Did you make sure to walk the dog? Did you do the dishes? And it can take different forms, but hey, how'd it go today? One of my favorites, rather than talking directly about classes or, did you do okay on the test, is to really go in and say, hey, how was lunch today? Or did you see your friends? Or things like that. One of the things I ask my son, he's in middle school, and I'll say, hey, what were the middle school antics today? And then we get in a funny conversation about how the day went and what things he saw. So checking in that way can really help open up the conversation that you might have with your youth or your teen. Okay, so we're going to move into warning signs. So really warning signs that someone may be thinking about suicide or having some suicidal ideation. And these are observable behaviors that signal that there is some suicidal thinking. And what I want to say here, and what Greg and I really want to make the point of saying, is that we really should be taking all signs seriously. I think sometimes it's, oh, they're just upset right now or they'll get over it. But we do want to take all signs seriously and investigate those with the youth or teen to make sure that it's not something more, right? I'd rather talk about it and be wrong than to not talk about it and miss something, right? So take all signs seriously. One thing that we can remember too is that the majority of people who die by suicide do show some warning signs along the way. Now, whether or not we pick up on those warning signs, that's something different. But people who are thinking about suicide or having suicidal ideation, they really are leaving us signs. They're leaving us clues that that's what's going on. So here are some of the warning signs that we'll talk about. Subtle threats, and that can be direct or indirect statements. So a direct statement would be, I want to kill myself. That's very direct. I'm going to kill myself. Indirect might be that they're expressing feelings of hopelessness, that they may talk about being a burden on someone or a burden to the family, a burden on this world. They may talk about having no reason to live. And I should say, I'm using the word talk about, but you may see signs of this in writing. in something that they're writing. Either I know for Greg and I, when we're at the schools, sometimes it might come up in an essay or a journal assignment that maybe a teacher sees, something like that, and we're going to go in and talk about that. So it might be that you see it in something that the person is producing, not just saying. A person may leave a note, a suicide note, or they may have a plan. And that plan could be, I know where the gun is in my house, and I know when people aren't home. It's really thinking about, for the person, how they might take their own life. So we're going to be mindful of that and thinking about that. We're also looking for sudden changes in behavior, appearance, or mood. And I really can say for all of these warning signs, they all really could fit into the category of a behavioral change of some kind. And we'll get into a little bit more about the behavioral changes, especially on the next slide. So any sort of sudden changes, we want to be mindful of that. Prior suicidal behavior. So if a person has had some prior suicidal behavior that has been noted in the past, that can leave them a little bit more open or susceptible to suicidal behavior in the future. And as Greg mentioned, it's episodic. So people don't become suicidal and just sort of stay that way always. Typically there's sort of a rise and a fall to it. But we want to be mindful of that, because if someone has had prior suicidal behavior, it puts them a little bit more at risk for suicidal behavior in the future. Making final arrangements. And this is just as it sounds, a person who gives away a prized possession. So a person who maybe has a collection of items that they've always been proud of, and then suddenly they're starting to give those items away. In and of itself may not be something, but that's something I would want to investigate or look into, or see if there are some other signs that are there too. So I would definitely be asking. Visiting or calling people to say goodbye. If you notice someone, a person is saying, goodbye, I may never see you again, I just want to say goodbye, or the prolonged goodbyes with a big hug that seems sort of um, disproportionate to maybe the visit, right? That was just had. You want to be mindful of that. Preoccupation with death. So just focusing on the idea of death, talking about death, writing about death, being attracted to different media that is about death. That's something we want to take note of as well. And here are some more of the things that would maybe fall into behavioral changes. So we have withdrawing from activities. So a person who was always on the basketball team and suddenly is like, it doesn't matter anymore, I don't want to play anymore. So the thing that used to bring them such joy no longer feels the same, and that they're withdrawing from activities, or not hanging out with friends as often. I'm just going to stay home. We want to kind of investigate that a little bit more. Isolating themselves from others. So again, kind of isolating themselves from their own peer groups, their own friendship circles, maybe isolating from the family. We want to be mindful of that. Sleeping too much. I think that's the one we always think of, that when people are feeling depressed or a sad mood, that they might sleep too much. But we also want to be cognizant of people who are sleeping too little. So they're unable to sleep, or for whatever reason just aren't getting that good sleep that they need. And that is a change in behavior from wherever they were before. So we want to be mindful of that. Of course, increased use of alcohol and drugs, or sudden improvement or relief. And this one might seem counterintuitive, but a person who maybe has decided for themselves that they would like to die by suicide may suddenly feel a sense of relief and an improved mood because they have made this decision. And so if you're seeing that sort of stark contrast from where they were, and then all of a sudden you see that relief, or that you feel like that weight lifted for them, I might want to investigate that as well. So trust your gut. You know your child best. That's the number one thing. If you're thinking, if your intuition is talking to you about this inner voice is sort of speaking to you about this, then I would definitely go with that and start asking the questions. We'll get to this a little bit later, but there's no harm in asking. I think that also can be counterintuitive. We think, oh, well, if we ask about suicide or suicidal ideation, we might be putting ideas in a person's mind. And we know from the research that that is far from the truth, and that we can really help save somebody by asking those questions. So don't be afraid to ask. And again, we're going to get to that a little bit later tonight. All right, so we're also going to talk about some ways to help, and this is where we wanted to spend a good chunk of our time talking about how to support your youth or your teen. And these are strategies for making connections, opening up important conversations, really making the topic of suicide not taboo, that we're really talking about that and being open about that. Youth who are feeling suicidal, they may not seek help directly. However, if we're really looking for these warning signs, we're going to approach them. You don't wait for your teen to come to you. You can ask your teen what's up. And if you notice anything that is off, you want to say that. Hey, I noticed that. At worst, like, no, nothing's going on. I'm good. But you want to make sure you're asking the questions. So I'm going to turn it back over to Greg, who's going to lead us through a little bit of how to start those conversations.
All right, thank you, Ricia. So we are talking a little bit more about now the kinds of skills or strategies you'd want to be using when we are starting to see some of those little hints or signs or behaviors that suggest maybe somebody is struggling. Before we talked about some of the positive things we want to see maybe more in general, but these are particularly useful skills here on the next couple slides about what to do when you do have concerns. The first and possibly most important skill in my book is this one, the skill of listening non-judgmentally. This is a skill that a lot of us have heard of and something that a lot of us talk about, but to do this takes a real deliberate effort and practice. So this is a time that I like to say as a parent, you really have to change gears. You really have to go from your typical day-to-day parent functioning. If you really want to work on this skill of listening non-judgmentally and try to help your young person open up, you're going to have to make it clear that this is different. I'm not just here to tell you what you need to do or tell you what you forgot to do or fix you or correct you. I'm actually going to put all that stuff aside and stop everything. I'm going to refrain from giving advice. And I'm not going to talk about my childhood and my stories and all the things I did when I had your problems. It's not about you right now. It's about the young person that you're trying to practice this skill with, listening non-judgmentally. So hold back on your judgments, try to lower your reactions, try to lower your emotions. If it's not the right time for that and you are on edge, it's not the right time. And you need to find another time to do it because you can't really do this skill when you are running at 1,000 miles a minute. So listening non-judgmentally is validating feelings, not interrupting, but saying here and there, reflecting back, wow, that sounds really hard. Oh man, you must have been so frustrated. Wow, you're really going through a lot right now. Using simple little feedback like that can help your young person realize, okay, they're not trying to tell me what to do here. They're just trying to show me they understand that this is hard. And that's a nice feeling. All of us have felt this before when somebody does this to us. It feels good and often makes me want to share more, which is the whole point here. We can normalize conversations about mental health. Ricia was just talking about this a little bit too. We can make it more common and more normal to just ask, how are you doing emotionally? How are you feeling lately? You've had a lot on your shoulders. this must be a hard time for you. And just kind of making it okay to talk about these things with somebody and check in about it. But always we want to try to pair these conversations with reassurance and messages of resiliency too. So, it's one thing to go through all of this and to share and to get somebody to open up, but we also need to finish every such conversation with some hope, some reason to have some hope. But this skill here is how you build trust. This is our biggest tool in our tool bag. I think as a parent, it's our biggest sort of weapon against the scary idea that, our young person is growing up, becoming more independent, and going to be doing things on their own. We can't see everything. We can't be with them all the time, but we can create a place for them that is trusting, calm, comfortable. We can create that connection with them that lets them know we can do this. We can listen non-judgmentally, and it can be a safe place to talk. But this is the sort of the second half of it, so to speak, is this idea that we also need to inject a little bit of hope. This is really providing hope through normalizing and recognizing that things can get better, and reminding the young people of their resilience. So reassuring is doing things like, some of these examples here. If I were in your position, I would feel the same way. I'm kind of validating them. I'm normalizing how they feel. Feeling that way means you're human. You're not, I like, they might feel like they're, why do I feel this way? Why am I so weak? Why am I always struggling with this and nobody else is? Well, actually feeling that way means you're human. We all go through this. I'm here for you. Should we try to find a solution or success story together? Reframing is kind of a separate skill altogether, and we could spend a ton of time talking about this. But we can, instead of giving young people the answers, because of course we have all the answers, right? It's easy to feel that we know what to do, and it would be easy enough to just tell our young people what to do. But we also, I think, all understand it doesn't work that way. It's not that easy. So instead, we can ask them challenging questions. Is there another way of looking at this? Am I missing something here? This doesn't really make sense to me. So there must be something we're not realizing here. You may ask, is there a middle ground or a gray area that I'm rejecting? Often people kind of go from black to white, or tunnel vision, where they get focused on a certain aspect of things. But instead, maybe there's another way of looking at this. Maybe there's something I'm forgetting to take into account. So, there are ways to ask these questions if you're thoughtful about it and you've worked hard at listening non-judgmentally. Your reframing and challenging questions are received better. We sort of earn the trust and earn the ability to challenge extreme thinking a little bit. This goes for my work as a psychologist, and it goes for my work as a parent too. It's the same thing. We have to build the trust first to get to the point where somebody trusts you enough to hear some feedback.
And I just want to acknowledge, I see that there's some questions coming in the chat, and we do have some time at the end, so we will get to those questions. I didn't want anybody to think we weren't seeing them. We are, but we'll get to those in a couple more slides. So thank you for being patient with that. We're going to talk a little bit now about things you can do if you notice some warning signs. And it can be really hard if your teen, if your youth, if your child is displaying warning signs. That's super scary. Greg and I talked about this, often when we're presenting for youth mental health first aid. And I want to acknowledge Michael Swisher also does those presentations as well, those workshops as well. But we've talked about before where, even though we've been doing this for many, many years, of asking these questions of youth, directly asking them if they're thinking about suicide, we always still get a little butterflies in our tummies before we go into this conversation. So it's not an easy conversation to have. It can be really scary, and there may even be some trepidation because you know you don't want to hear the words that you don't want to hear coming from your child or from that youth that you're talking to. So I want to acknowledge that it is really really hard when you're going down this path. It's difficult, but what's really key is you have to remain calm. And even if you're not feeling it on the inside, you might be screaming in your head. You might be really upset in your head, but your outward appearance is you want to remain calm. And this is especially because if your child, if the youth, the teen is feeling really upset by this, they might be also really scared, and they want to look to you to see that you're calm, that it's going to be okay. They're going to take a lot of their cues from you. Now, sometimes a person might be so dysregulated that it's really tough. And in those moments, the best thing you can do is to sit with them, again, remain calm and co-regulate really. So your calmness is sort of a draw for them to meet you at the state you're at. And that's going to be the most important thing if a person's really, really upset. You want to kind of stay with them until they're able to sort of calm down a little bit. And then you can get into some of the questions. But just being there, being supportive, providing a safe environment is really, really so important. I can't stress how important that is. Again, asking youth directly if they're thinking about suicide, really important. You're not going to plant something in their mind that they weren't already thinking about. It's not suggestive, and the research tells us that when we ask, we can save lives. Okay, and we're going to get to how you ask. That's coming in another slide or two. We're going to actually go through the questions. You want to focus on the concern for their well-being and avoid being accusatory. And this kind of goes back to what Greg was talking about and having those conversations with youth, really focusing on their concern and well-being and saying to them, I love you. I'm here with you. You're safe. Let's get through this together. I know this is a really difficult time, but I'm here for you. One of my favorite things that I like to say is, the one thing I know for sure is humans don't stay the same. It is impossible. So that is the one thing I can guarantee, that how you feel right now will change. I can't tell you how it's going to change, but it will change because humans can never stay the same. And I'm here with you. I'm going to stick with you. That help, that reassurance, it will go a really long way. And then just avoiding judgment. Often as people calm down from being really upset, they may feel ashamed at how they acted or embarrassed, and not as and they shouldn't, and we don't want to have people feel that way. So avoiding judgment can help a person feel safe in sharing more with you about where they're at and how they're feeling in that moment. So it goes back to that listening non-judgmentally. Okay, so if you do notice the warning signs, you want to provide constant supervision. You do not want to leave the youth alone, leave your child alone. This is really, really important because you want to ensure that they're safe until the crisis until you're through the crisis and you can get to other care. That could be counseling, whatever it is, but you want to make sure that when that person is displaying the warning signs or in crisis, you're not going to leave them alone. You want to remove any means for self-harm. So that could be the removal of lethal weapons, putting locks on medications, removing sharp objects, all very important. And then you want to get help. So you can seek help from your school or community mental health resources as soon as possible. We talked about 988. Again, it's 24/7. If you feel that your child's in immediate danger, you want to call 911. Now, if you're not in crisis, one thing I want to offer as school people is that if you do have questions about mental health or any of the things we've talked about, you can call your school counselor, your school psychologist. You can call, we have so many mental health providers in the schools and APS. We counted up our team at Washington Liberty. I think we had like 25 mental health providers in the school. So there are a lot of people who can answer your questions. So if you're not sure where to start, just give someone from the school a call and we can, if we don't know the answer, we'll help connect you with someone who does. So there are a lot of resources that you can tap into, especially here in Arlington. All right. So this is the part that I was talking about, and this is asking youth directly about suicide. And we do go into this a little bit more in the youth mental health first aid, but we felt it really important to include this slide as part of the presentation today. And you can see the steps there. And the first one is just to assess the situation. And that's really, are you seeing signs? You know, you're assessing your child, you're assessing that youth, that teen. What signs are you seeing that there is some distress or a crisis that is there? And then you see below that you can ask the question. So step 2 is asking the question, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And the one thing I want to point out here is that we're not going to ask, do you want to hurt yourself? It's a little too vague and doesn't get to the point. It's not direct enough. So you really do want to ask, are you thinking about killing yourself? Are you thinking about suicide? And if that feels scary, it should. Those are scary questions. And like I said, Greg and I have talked about this before. We still get those little butterflies before we ask that question. And if this feels difficult, you can even practice talking to, you know, someone yourself in the mirror, or practice talking to another trusted adult that you have before you ask that question, just so you can, you know, hear those words come out of your mouth and that you can feel at least a little more comfortable. But it is really important to be direct in the questions that you're asking. If the person says yes, then you're going to ask about a plan. Have you thought about a plan how you would kill yourself? Have you decided when you would do it? Or have you done anything to get the things you need to kill yourself? And this is important because this lets you know how far along a person is in their suicidal ideation. And if they're thinking about a plan, that's really upping the risk level and how quickly you want to get help. So if they're answering yes to any of these questions, they're telling you that they have a plan, you're looking at making that call to 911 or looking for a mental health crisis professional. So it's really important that you get help immediately if you have a person with you who is saying yes, and then also they have a plan. That means they're really thinking about it and they're in a high crisis state at that point. So we are going to move to, I think this is where we get to APS resources and community resources. Go ahead, Greg.
Okay. So we've thrown a lot of information at you already. And really, I think the remainder of our presentation is really talking about resources that are available to you. So I might just do a really simple overview for a moment, and then I might actually invite some of our other folks who are here with us today to share what they want to share about other resources in the community, because really that's what we're moving into now. We've kind of shared with you some of the ideas about prevention, awareness, strategies, and skills for suicide prevention. And now we're talking about things that are available to you and how to access them. So I think briefly, I would just highlight a couple things, and then I might share the floor here with our other folks from BHS. So I think the biggest thing to remember is where we started this whole thing. 988 is actually a great resource for you. And 988 is not listed here. I think it might be on, yeah, it's on this slide as a national resource, but it really does connect you to a local person who might have some knowledge if you can get connected to that. Like Ricia said, if you're calling from a local number, it'll probably direct you to a local volunteer who has some idea of what's available in the Arlington area. But also, just as a general resource, I tell students they can call 988 in the middle of the night just to talk something through, and that would be fine also. But in terms of the local resources that do exist, we have emergency services and we have more of your non-emergency services. We are very fortunate to be in a county that has so many incredible resources available to us. So you can see the contact there for emergency mental health. We also have CR2, which can provide emergency services and even come to the home. Crisis Stabilization Services, REACH, is for services available to those who have developmental disabilities. We have services for children and adults. These services that I speak of, by the way, can be anything from emergency stabilization, which is a little more intensive, to things like outpatient counseling, weekly counseling. One of the greatest concerns that a lot of people have is, how would I access this? What if I don't have insurance? What if I can't pay for this? It must be really expensive. What I recommend to people who have such questions and concerns is start by just talking to somebody and going and doing the interview, the intake. If you think someone really needs some mental health support, start there and let them tell you. It's free to go have that, sort of intake, and it's free to get some advice. They can let you know how much it would cost to you, whether insurance covers it or whether they're going to work with the sliding scale to reduce costs to meet someone where they're at financially. In terms of national resources, 988 is your go-to. I'll just keep repeating that because it's so simple and so easy, and I hope everyone knows how available that is to them, and it becomes like 911 in terms of its familiarity for everybody. But we also have other hotlines and lifelines for folks who may have, they may want to talk to somebody who understands their particular situation or their particular identity of viewing things in the world. So Trevor Project is great for LGBTQ youth. There's so many other levels of specialty that we haven't even touched on here. But I think I want us to maybe stop there. What do you think, Ricia? Stop there and kind of open things up a little bit. We said we wanted to be available for questions, and we do.
Yes. So we actually do have a couple questions in the chat, and also want to say that Michael has dropped some things in the chat, some different resources, and I think Kathleen also included a resource that will have some of this information that we've shared. So some things are already in the chat. If you want to open up that, I do want to get to the question, and then that's in here. And the question is it equally